Welcome to the K through second Q&A panel session. Excited to have you here, those who are here live and those who are just going to be watching this via the recording. Really excited to be able to share with you what we're going to share for you to take away what's relevant and to leave behind what's not. So why do we do this? We are giving back to the homeschooling community. The group of us were like, wow, there are so many new people coming in, but even just K through second, people are kind of new anyway, whether you were going to do this because of COVID or whether you were going to do this anyway. So we've got a lot of experience here. We can share it with you. We're really just giving back. And we've been in your shoes, right? We've all started. I started my first daughter in second grade and then my second daughter in kindergarten. So we know the pressure that you can feel and that it's really not necessary. It's good because you're feeling it means you care. But we're hoping that we can lighten a little bit of that for you. So we're passing it on, paying it forward, and there's so many new homeschoolers that we wanted to offer this. So I'm the session moderator, Kathleen Rumford. I homeschooled my two daughters from 2000 to 2014. And I'm just going to kind of go through this. When I first heard of homeschooling, I didn't even know it was legal. I actually was like, that's legal? But when my older daughter was going into second grade public school, I really felt led to bring her home. And I thought, I can homeschool her for a year in second grade. I can't possibly mess that up, right? And right, of course not. But of course I felt a little bit of pressure. But I went on to homeschool both girls through high school, dual enrollment. My older daughter has her master's in Spanish sociolinguistics, and the younger, who did struggle through school with a mild processing delay, earned her bachelor's in creative advertising and business last year, and both own their own businesses. So that gives you some good hope. Homeschooling my girls has been the most rewarding experience of my life thus far for many reasons, but I now have a grandbaby, so there's more to come for me. I currently do financial consulting work and own my own business, focusing on improving financial literacy in this country. And I also started 2 Facebook groups, Homeschool High School Support Group and Katalytic Kids, which seeks to help parents empower their kids towards godly character, financial literacy, contentment, and strong work ethic. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I'm going to be mainly fielding questions out of the chat box today and let the panelists do their thing today. And I'm just going to introduce the panelists. We have 4 panelists, and right off the bat, I want to thank them because obviously this was my idea, but I couldn't possibly do this by myself, and it's been a while since I've homeschooled kindergarten. So I just want to welcome Julie Kirkwood. She's a mom of 2 teens and a tween. She's homeschooled some combination of her children for 10 years. She authored the website Creekside Learning, which is amazing. I checked it out. You guys can check that out, Creekside Learning, and ran a successful business providing art and nature classes to homeschooling families before returning to full-time work as a social worker. She's a moderator of the Dulles Area Homeschoolers Facebook group, so you might know her from that. She's allowing her children to acquire too many pets during the pandemic, but is delighted at how much they've learned from the experience. So welcome, Julie. Thank you for being here. Christine McCurdy, she started homeschooling over 20 years ago and has since graduated 3 of her boys from Homeschool High School, has 1 currently at Potomac Falls High School, and continues to homeschool her 5th grade daughter. Post-high school sons have received 2 Ivy League admissions, multiple Service Academy admissions, ROTC scholarships, and an NCAA D1 athletic scholarship. Another son went straight from high school to professional apprenticeship. So again, homeschooling works. We all know that. Kimberly, so welcome, Christine. Thank you for being here. Kimberly Millhouse. Kimberly is a homeschool mom of 5, 4 boys and a girl, and has been homeschooling for 21 years. She has graduated 3 who went on to college, and 1 is now in law school. She still has 2 at home, a junior in high school and a 4th grader with learning disabilities, severe dyslexia, and ADD. When Kimberly started the journey, it had never been her desire or even skill set to be a teacher, but God has used the process to prove himself bigger than her inadequacies and to build beautiful relationships within her family. So thank you so much for being here, Kimberly. And Julie Elliott. Julie has been homeschooling her 3 daughters for 13 years. She's got a rising 7th, 9th, and 12th graders. She began homeschooling when her oldest was in preschool and asked, how do I read by myself? Before she had children, Julie had taught kindergarten for 10 years and 1st and 2nd grade for 3 years. She loves teaching, and one of the best parts for her is teaching children to read and watching their world open up to them. As her children grew and moved into middle school, so did Julie. This will be Julie's 6th year teaching literature and writing at her co-op for the middle school students, an age group she never thought she would teach, but has found that she truly enjoys. So Thank you, Julie, for being here. And I just want to, again, just thank each of these panelists for being here and sharing their wisdom with us. So the topics we're going to cover, we're not going to get to all of this. A lot of this is, all of these things are covered in the Q&A document, the questions that you sent in and that we've been responding to. All of this is covered in there. So you're going to get that document mid next week. But today we're going to talk first about schedules, reading, learning styles, special needs, curriculum, social opportunities. We put stuff into that document, and proof of progress we put into the document. We probably won't have time to get there. So we're going to go through a topic, a couple people will share, and then I'll check the chat box to see if anybody has any questions about that topic, bring them in, and then move on to the next topic. So I'm going to start with topic 1, scheduling, multiple children, amount of time. And Christine, if you wouldn't mind kicking this one off, and then maybe one other person chime in, and then I'll see if we have any questions in the chat box, okay?
I think we did adhere to we kept a routine and a schedule. I think that for kids, well, for everybody, predictability is a helpful thing to have. When we met to talk about what we were going to discuss, a couple of moms also chimed in that it really is great to have a routine and a schedule, but to not be a slave to it. Things go wrong, and that's okay. But to have kind of a general block of time, this is going to happen. The morning starts a certain way, things happen, the routine goes, typically it goes this way, and allowing there to be predictability, I think makes a big difference. One of the things that worked well for us, the 4 boys were born pretty close together, 6 years apart. And at the convention that I went to, I think the forum was teaching preschoolers, toddlers, elementary school, and loving it. And it really was kind of like Full Metal Jacket with 4 boys, 2nd grade, 1st grade, pre-K, and a toddler. And one of the tips that Vicki Bentley was the speaker, the way she outlined it, was there were kind of 4 stations in our home. Each child had one-on-one time learning with me. And when you're in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, we're talking maybe 15 or 20-minute blocks. We're not talking 45-minute blocks. Math doesn't need to be done for more than about 15 or 20 minutes. So they would learn independent with me, one-on-one. A lot of times that was phonics, which seemed to require the most teacher-student time. Even little math pages in 1st and 2nd grade, the adding and subtracting, that kind of thing. Once they understood what they were supposed to be doing, they a lot of times could work that independently. They were also supposed to spend a little bit of time learning something independently. That wasn't necessarily free learning. That was something I gave them to do, whether it was a couple of puzzles I wanted them to work on, something like building a ziggurat out of blocks, doing a specific picture, or it was kind of an assignment I had given them, but they had to do it alone. The 3rd station was that the older children would spend time actually ministering to, teaching, or working with a younger child. The boys actually had a lot of fun with this. They would plan activities for Daniel and even for the baby, so the 3-year-old and even the 1-year-old. They would plan activities the night before. I really didn't have very much to do with this. And the 2nd child really wasn't reading, but he would sit down with a book with the 3-year-old and he would, quote, read it to the 3-year-old. It didn't matter what they did. The point was that they were they were planning something that the younger child would specifically benefit from or enjoy. And then the last one that we did was, at some point in the day, everybody, typically it was, everybody would spend time alone, where they weren't being entertained by another sibling. They just learned to be content either with their book, their toys, and it was just a quiet downtime for the whole house. That really was instrumental in us being, in me surviving, because that's not a joke. I know a lot of people use nap time to get things done. That just wasn't an option for me at that point because I needed nap time too. I needed some downtime and some quiet time. So I think if nap time works for you, maybe that's great. But I would caution you that kindergarten, first, second grade is a lot of fun, but it is also a lot of work for the mom. It's not the same as junior high where you can say, go read these books, write a paper. There's very little independent work that's being accomplished. And so pace yourself and make sure that you are getting some peace and quiet, some rest, and some recovery time. The other thing that we did with our schedule was we would start the day all together doing either a devotion or character trait or something like that. And then that one-on-one time with mom would always start with the youngest student. There was a philosophy there that and none of this is mine, it was all Vicky's, that you're implicitly then teaching your children that the little ones are not in the way. You don't push them out of the way so you can get on to important things. So even if it was just reading a picture book or something to the youngest child, or like Dr. Seuss's ABC, the youngest one would always do school with me first. And that really doesn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes, but it does set a tone in the home that these younger people are not inconveniences and they're not in the way. And I think there was a lot of fruit from our home that came from that philosophy. So for what it's worth.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Christine. I love the idea of the stations. Julie, I think you were going to speak to this maybe also.
Yeah. So being the public school kindergarten teacher for 10 years in first and second grade, when I first started homeschooling, I had this vision that my homeschooling day had to last from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And I quickly realized, no, a lot of that time in the public schools is spent, how long does it take for the entire class to wash their hands before going to lunch or to walk quietly down the hall? And so the actual instruction time is much more succinct. Plus it's one-on-one and it's not me teaching 23 students and needing to make sure that they all understand. So I just like to, it's quick. It's 15, 20 minutes. When I would pull my students over to work with them one-on-one, that was like 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. So when you're one-on-one with your own student, it can definitely seem like it's going so fast and what are you missing? And you're not teaching them everything that they need to know. And that's not true. So trust your gut, know that what you are giving them is fantastic. I used to tell the parents of my students that they have the rest of their lives till they are 21 years old to be in school, to sit at a desk, to learn, and that these kindergarten, first and second grade years, get them outside. Do as much fun, hands-on stuff as you can. Like Christine said, it is a lot of work and it is a time consuming, but it is so worth it because at this young age, so they're learning to read and they're learning to take in the world in brand new ways every day. So just feed into that, figure out what excites them. And if my kids love to go on hikes, so we would drive over to Balls Bluff or Red Rocks parks around here and just park our car and go for a walk. They would love to turn over the rocks and look at the bugs underneath them. That was not me. I am not a science girl at all. But I had to learn to just let them do it and be like, okay, yeah, you can show me, but I'm not touching it. So just have fun and enjoy the time. And I did use nap time because I want, like I did what Christine did. I started with my youngest, but then by the time I got to my oldest, I really felt like I needed to just kind of zoom in on her a little bit. So I did use nap time, but like Christine said, find what works for you and go with that. But yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Does anybody else have anything to say here? We have no questions in the chat box. Kimberly?
Yeah, I had a few things to add. Can you hear me okay? I'm in my car on my earbuds.
Yes.
Okay. I think, having done this for a long time, I learned a lot through making a lot of my mistakes. So that's where I did most of my learning through making mistakes. So, don't over plan. I think allowing time for our schedule, like these other ladies are saying, for just play, for, that it's okay to have curriculum to follow. Like I said in my bio, I'm not a natural, like teaching children was not my forte. That's not what I went to and got my college degree for. So this was, so I had a lot of learning to do, how to do this. And thankfully with my rising fourth grader, I'm doing it a lot better than I did with my first child. So don't over plan, plan your day out. It's good to have structure. It's good to have a schedule. It's good for your kids to kind of know what you're expecting the day to sort of look like. But schedule, allow for frequent breaks to play. My 9-year-old I'm teaching right now, we're actually teaching him more on a first grade, second grade level because of his severe ADD and his severe dyslexia and ADD. So it's going to take us a lot longer to get through the things that I got through with my first several children. But have snack breaks. They need to keep their blood sugar stable, as well as you also need to to eat here and there, keep your blood sugar level. That's so important for both of you. Even stopping for a short game can help keep your child engaged. Your sessions should be 15-20 minutes long, and then stop for a game if you still have other things you want to accomplish with them. And just set a time limit. Even 10 minutes is a good amount of time, especially for your boys. I have 4 boys and they need exercise. They need to get their energy out. I have a little small trampoline that I found on Facebook or Craigslist, and I just say, hey, get up there and go do some jumping, or I have him spell words for me while he's jumping on the trampoline. Just getting some exercise while he's doing his school is also good. I'm not a super great, fun, crafty mom. So if you're like me out there, just know that there's hope. When people say, make it fun, play with your kids, I'm like, I don't know how to do that. But you can learn how to do that. And it's just about really building relationships. Instead of trying to let the schedule dictate to you, let that just be your structure that you follow, but allow the time for other things to interrupt, and don't become a slave to that schedule that you've got to get X, Y, and Z covered by lunchtime or else you're a failure. It's easy to fall into that trap as a mom and as a homeschool mom. Just relax and honestly find the fun and the enjoyment in teaching them the subjects that you're teaching them. If you have fun and enjoy what you're doing, your kids are going to enjoy it as well. They're really going to listen. They're really going to take their cues from you. Let's see. I was too uptight with my first kids. I thought I had to complete every lesson and every part of every lesson in the book, and you don't have to do that. You can relax and teach them what you can. And then I would just say, that's what I would say. I think about schedules, that they're important, but don't make them the master.
Great. Thanks, Kimberly. So we do have one question. So one of the participants has to work her routine around full-time teleworking. So does anyone have thoughts on that? I'm not sure if anyone worked while they were homeschooling.
I'm doing that now, and I'll be homeschooling all 3 of my kids while working full-time. So it's the first time I've done that. But previously I worked part-time and homeschooled 2 of my kids, I guess 3 of them at one point. And I guess the best thing I can say is it's okay to school at non-traditional times. It's okay to do reading instruction in the evening. I mean, I did that when I wasn't working at all because I found like one of my kids just engaged at that time. Like that was her brain was on at that time. And I wanted to capitalize on that, because it took me a lot shorter of a time to cover something with her than if I was trying to do it on my own time and she was resisting because she wanted to play or whatever. So I would just say, you know, don't take that school model from when they go to the brick building from 7:30 in the morning to 3 and think it has to be covered then. It can be covered on the weekends. It can be covered in the evenings. It can be covered at lunchtime. I'm fortunate that my employer is going to let me work some flexible scheduling. So I'm going to be able to take a chunk in the middle of the day, a couple days a week, and be able to work with my kids and then finish my day a little bit later into the evening. So if you have that option, definitely ask. It wasn't something that was offered to me at work. It was something that I just proposed and said, can we try this? I'm trying it during the summer. It's working. So they're willing to let me do it.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like a few people are in the same boat. And just remember what you're hearing here about kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Take some of the pressure off yourself, and remember that you can give a kindergartner 2 hours total a day, and they're going to be fine. It probably even less, right? And then having them get playtime and doing whatever you're going to do for them while you're working, whoever's watching over them while you're working. So you can do it at this young age, I think, maybe even more easily maybe than the middle ages, but
You know, Kathleen, there's a couple other, because it does depend on the ages of the children
yeah.
too. One thing I know is super helpful was books on tape for our kids. If you can work your children up, the kindergartner, even the 2-year-old, so that they're listening to really good books on tape, maybe 30, maybe start with 15 or 20 minutes and work them up to an hour a day, I think you'd be amazed at the payoff of just listening. You can give them books that are so beyond what we would call homeschoolers read alouds, but things like Chronicles of Narnia or the Newbery Award winners, things that typically in first and second grade they would not be capable of reading. You'd be really surprised at the vocabulary that it builds, the language skills that it builds, and you can do that while you're not working with them at all. We may enjoy reading aloud on the couch, but it's easy to have there be some time each day where you say, now is your read aloud time, and don't underestimate the impact of that on their education. It's absolutely stunning. And it's one of those plugins that you takes nothing for you. The one thing I would encourage you to do, whether you're working or not, is to unplug them from everything else. There's this tendency to, I call it credit card parenting. The more you plug them in, whether it's iPads, TVs, whatever it is, I feel like there's a bill that comes later, and it comes with significant interest. So no matter how much, whatever it takes to try to unplug from everything else, I would encourage you, if you can keep them off of everything else, I think you'll reap huge dividends later. So for what it's worth, books on tape were enormously helpful to us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and our, a lot of the libraries somebody's mentioning has access to, a program where where we are, Hoopla is what we use, and you can get books on tape, movies on tape or video, all that kind of stuff through Hoopla online. One of the things that Allison mentioned was her daughter's a hands-on learner. So, for someone who's now just listening to an audiobook that's a hands-on person, you might want to give them a coloring book or something, or something to doodle on, so that they can be a little bit kinesthetic while they're actually listening as well. It can engage their brain in a better way. Or Legos. Yeah, exactly. So great. Thank you so much for that. Those thoughts on schedules. And we do have a lot of this written up in the document we're going to send you. So our next topic is reading. Oh, that was the questions. Okay, is reading. Kind of reading, writing, these kinds of things for kindergartners. And how can we take some of the pressure off with the feeling that they've got to be reading by a certain time? And I think Julie Kirkwood, you were going to talk about this first.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I felt that pressure too, but looking at what happens now with kindergartners and first graders, like, there's such a big academic push and such a big push to read early that wasn't present just a generation ago. If you think about your own schooling, probably a lot of us were not pushed to read in preschool to get ready for kindergarten, and then to first grade, and we turned out okay. Like, I like to joke with people, like, I'm okay, I read all the time, I have a master's degree, but I went to a kindergarten at a time when kindergarten was dress up and play and take naps and maybe, learn the ABCs kind of a thing. So what the studies have shown is that even when you start that early push to read, is that by about third grade, everybody's in about the same place. Kids learn to read just like all their other developmental tasks at different times. So not every child learns to walk at exactly 1 year, but everybody gets walking. So just remember that when you are working with your child, that some kids read early, some kids read late. They're going to get there. I would just say, like, read aloud to your kids daily. What Christina's suggesting about, reading to them or having them listen to books that are far above their vocabulary level or what would be something they would read has tremendous benefit in just exposing them to language. Focusing just like on sounds of letters for kids who aren't reading yet, just in everything you do, noticing letters and what sounds they're making. We liked those little Bob books that you can pick up, like a little set at Costco. Those were great. They're so simple, but they really help to get kids reading. And then, there's certainly a certain percentage of kids who are not going to read, who probably, have dyslexia. I have 2 kids with dyslexia, and the first one, no matter what we did, she was not reading until, she was 9 years old and was still only reading very basic, cat, sat, hat kind of things. And despite interventions, despite checking her vision, despite talking to a reading specialist, until we had her tested and diagnosed with dyslexia and could switch her to a more appropriate curriculum that is just for kids with dyslexia. And now she's, reading, she can read literally anything. She's learned how to decode any word, even if she doesn't know what it means, but she's reading beautifully. So if you're get concerned about that, you have to sort of differentiate. Do I have a late reader, or is this really a problem? There's tons of resources out there. There's tons of even just for homeschoolers of parents with dyslexia. I got a lot of information from Facebook groups that are centered around that helped me to figure out what was going on for my child and to take the right approach.
Wow, thanks so much, Julie. You've got a lot of experience there. Really appreciate that. Any other panelists want to talk about reading? I think Julie Elliott, you wanted to, right?
Yeah. So reading was my favorite part in teaching kindergarten, because I just remember students would look at me and be like, I can read it. And it is really fun and it's really exciting. And so sometimes parents get all, like the other Julie was just saying, caught up in time and, oh, my neighbor's kid is reading, and, oh, why isn't mine? Or, oh, mine can read on a second grade level. And you're just like, ah. So just don't try to take your child and fit them into a box, because every child is different. And they will all, like Julie said, catch up and be fine. One of the things that I would strongly encourage for any child this age, but especially those who might not be reading as quickly, is just reading aloud to them, or the books on tape, because there's something called the instructional level, where you're teaching them. Then there's also like their read alone level, where it's going to be below that level, because there's words that they can understand. And then there's like the above, where it's vocabulary words are in that book and they can't pronounce them, but they can hear it and they can hear it being read to them. So there's all those different levels. So if you give a book to a child to read on their own, just make sure that it's one that they can be successful with and not feel oh, I can't read this. But there are books that I refuse to sell because I just have these fond memories of sitting on my bed or on the couch with my kids and reading to them. And there are so many things that can be learned from a read aloud. It doesn't have to be individual reading for them to learn. Like when we were reading Mr. Popper's Penguin, it's just, I'm sure some of you have seen the movie even, but what can you learn from that? Well, we talked about using your imagination, marching to the beat of your own drum, and not worrying about what other people think, and just being silly and problem solving and just all kinds of stuff. And there are just great books out there. There are wonderful reading lists. You might be sitting there going, well, I don't even know what books to read. There are wonderful reading lists out there on the internet. If you want to look at what the public schools are reading, you can. You can just Google that, second grade reading list for Northern Virginia or second grade reading list for North Carolina. There are also private schools. If you know the name of a private school near you that you can think of, they sometimes put their reading lists out there for their students to read over the summer. So you can kind of sometimes Google that to get a reading list. But even just sitting in the car, thinking of like, you're sitting at the stoplight. Oh, what does stoplight start with? Or whatever, ST. But I'm huge phonics. I'm huge. If you start with those little phonics and building blocks and you build, that will be very helpful. But just take every opportunity to, it doesn't have to be sitting at a desk in your kitchen or in your house. It can be in the car. It can be on your bed with them all. Like I would get so hot because they would all just be on next to me, on top of me. I'd be like, okay, back up. I need my space. But so just enjoy that moment of reading to them also, because the most important thing for a kindergartner, their second grade, is hearing the language and being exposed to it and having every opportunity. I'd almost say it's more important than math because they will get math or whatever, but the English language and their brain, the way that it's developing at this early stage, it's just, yeah, as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. We had the same experience with my daughters, just read. And I mean, even into 16, we did read alouds because that was our special time where I was reading a different thing to them. And of course, they could probably read that at that point, but it just became such a special time for us. So we do have one question, Noelle, is about social connections, things like that. We are going through topics kind of in order. Social connections is a few topics away, so hopefully we'll get to that. But remember, anybody who put a question into the registration form, we have addressed that, and we're going to be sending that question answer document to you next week. It's already like 11, 12 pages long with answers and comments, so we definitely addressed that in there as well. Okay, so on to the next topic. The next topic is learning styles.
Kathleen, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
So that whole reading aloud thing, if you have an older sibling, they can read to the younger ones. And it's a great activity for dads to do at night or while you're getting dinner ready or whatever. So it doesn't always have to be you. That's
true. My husband was really into Narnia and a few different series, and he read to them at night a lot of times. So that was fun. So, and we did put in links. Kimberly's saying Google the 1,000 good books list online. I think she put the link to that in the document we're going to send you. And I put a link to the Sunlight curriculum reading list by age, by grade into the document. So there's already a lot of great options in there for you. So learning styles. Does anyone want to talk about this? Panelists?
I can start if you want.
Sure.
This was a hard one for me because I tend to be really disciplined. I was brought up in parochial school, and you sit straight and you have a desk, and my first 3 children adhered to that beautifully, and that's just the way I think things should be done. That's not the way things need to be done, and it may not even be the most effective way to do things. My 4th son just was a very different kid. And I started following, he's a great author, Leonard Sachs. He has several books out. The one I read was Why Gender Matters, which is brilliant, but it's kind of a big big voluminous book. He also has, which I'd highly encourage you to look into, Boys Adrift and Girls on the Edge. And he outlines optimizing learning environment as opposed to just being in a learning environment. And there is a place for discipline and structure. And we went to church, and we did require that fourth son. He had to sit with us until it was time for children's church to start, because I do think that sitting still and being able to handle yourself in a restaurant or that kind of thing, those are life skills that you need to develop. But to optimize his learning, I did not require him to sit the way I did the other three boys. He did times tables to jumping jacks. We did go and buy a trampoline, and he would do 10 minutes with me in kindergarten, and then I would make him jump 100 times, which he learned to count to 100. So the abandoning the desk and seat thing is not necessarily a bad thing. It was a bigger stretch for me, and I was afraid I would lose control of all four boys because they do kind of feed off each other. I didn't. He would roll around on the floor while we did narration, where I would read a history lesson, and then the children in either the next day or later that afternoon would narrate back to me the lesson. He did his narration rolling on the floor. He's now a junior in high school. He's doing AP classes. He's great. There are no problems. But that was hard for me. I was really afraid that I was failing this kid. The information is in there. His math skills were in there. He was reading, but it did not look the way it did in a brick and mortar school with a desk and a chair. So I guess I would say don't be afraid to loosen up a little bit. I find that very hard, but don't be afraid to loosen up. Those books are really fantastic if you're looking for ways to optimize, make learning the most optimal, create an optimal environment for children. It was really helpful.
Great, Christine. Thank you. You know what? I was checking on something while you were talking. So if you wouldn't mind shooting us those names of those books at some point, and I'll put them in that document, or you can put them in that document we're going to send to everyone. Thank you. Anybody else on learning styles? This is something that I did have some experience with, but just wondering if anybody else has anything to say on that.
I would just say, like, behavior is information, behavior is communication. Like, if your child's not responding to something that you're using, whether it's a curriculum or a learning style or a way that you are teaching, that you can take that information and customize things for them, and homeschooling in a way that the public school cannot do because they're teaching a larger group of children. But we kind of did some of the similar things. My oldest son did not want to sit still at the table, and that was fine. He has ADHD, and when we did put him in school, they wanted to know, what accommodations he needed. And I thought, well, at home he doesn't need them because I don't require him to sit. He can move around and learn. We wrote math facts on the driveway in chalk, and he rode his scooter around to each one, or he would just be in motion, like with the mini trampoline while I was doing a read aloud. And that is just what worked for him. And then, just lots of preferences. If I have a kid that wants to learn hands-on learning and likes to build, then, rather than writing me a paragraph about the Egyptian pyramids, he built them out of Legos and was able to spout all kinds of facts about them that he picked up from, me reading to him about it. So just adapting to your child. You can read so much information if you just Google child-led learning. Which is a lot of what we did in our family. I required my kids to do math and reading, and everything else was based on their interests. And what I found was that they did include all sorts of subjects. They gravitated towards science and history and social studies and art very naturally without me saying, we are going to sit down and do history now. It's really amazing when you give them that freedom. And then, of course, I would also kind of put things in their way. There's a term called strewing, where you just kind of, add things to the environment that you want them to learn about, and just let them kind of discover it. There's also like rabbit trail learning. Like, this is the way I did science with my littles for years, is literally nature study and animals. And what Julie was talking about, like, they found bugs. And so we came home and we Googled that, and we got library books about it, and we learned about the life cycle of those bugs. And that is science, and that counts just as much as reading a textbook and requiring them to, do an assignment about it. And in fact, it created such a love of learning in them that I longed to have had when I was a child. I hated history until I homeschooled my kids, and now I love it, and I read it on my own time because I learned how to use resources that were not boring, dry old textbooks. I mean, there's a time and a place for that. If you need it, you're a history major in college maybe. But for the little kids, just making that interesting and incorporating play, because that's what kids naturally do at that age.
Great, thank you so much. And for me, with the learning styles, I had a visual learner and I had an auditory learner, and then there's also kinesthetic learners. So my visual learner was like me, I was a visual learner, so we kind of jived, and she was the oldest. Then I get my second child, who's an auditory learner, and she's sitting on the floor playing at 4 years old while I'm reading to the older one, who was 7, almost 8 at that point. And then later we were in the bathtub, and she's telling me all this stuff about the history that I've been reading, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I wasn't even reading to her, but she was there absorbing it because she was an auditory learner. So I needed to understand that she was an auditory learner, and she needed help in that way, even throughout high school and even into college. She listened to books on tape for some of the books that she was reading as a college student. So me knowing that she was an auditory learner and I was visual, I needed to teach to her preference and not to mine. And that's something I put in the document. I wrote up a little bit about that, but that was something about learning styles that was interesting to me. And I only had the 2 kids. One matched my learning style and the other one didn't. So that was helpful for me to find that out, when she was starting in kindergarten, 1st grade. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. And this one, let me just preface this one. So special needs, Christine called it a superpower. Just a follow-on question that's regarding this, back to what we were just talking about, to both Christine and Julie Kirkwood. When you had your children who had ADHD or dyslexia or whatever you were working with, and you let them ride scooters and you let them jump on trampolines and such and such when they're younger. Christine, you alluded to this, saying that he's fine. Your older one is, in high school and he's fine now. I think one of the concerns as a young homeschooler, a kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade parent of a homeschooler, you think, well, I can't let them do that. I can't let them ride their scooter. They can't do that for their whole school, life. So I can't let them do that now. Could you just really cover that really quickly again?
Yeah, they can't forever. But what they need to do now is learn and learn to love learning. And there is one thing I really would like to add here is when you do make accommodations, one of the Julies mentioned this, when you do make accommodations like we outlined, document those things, keep it in a file. For one of our boys, when we transitioned to high school, actually before we transitioned to high school, he does have ADHD, and he has some learning glitches. We did have him evaluated in high school, which I would not recommend doing until you hit 8th or 9th grade. Those evaluations are expensive, and they only are good for about 4 years, okay? If you're homeschooling, those evaluations don't do anything to help you. Those evaluations allow you to have accommodations in a public school system. If you keep a record of the accommodations you make, starting in 1st grade, so for example, I use a scooter, we do chalk on the driveway, it doesn't matter what accommodations you're doing. We do books on tape, whatever. keep a running list of that year by year. We had him evaluated, and then with the package that I had kept of accommodations that we had done through 8th grade, I was able to get accommodations, testing accommodations through the College Board. That's a really big deal. When he transitioned to high school, he also, all of those accommodations, because I had done it through the College Board, everything transferred into the public high school, and it is transferring into college, actual college. But the expense of the testing is something you should wait, please wait, because the only benefit it provides to you is that they will then allow your child accommodations in the public school. I thought I had probably failed him. By the time we had him tested in 8th or 9th grade, I started crying, and they came back with all this, you know, the technicalities and the special words for what he's struggling with. And the tester actually said to me, "You could not have done better for him than homeschool him." He said he's actually phenomenally well educated. He's got an arsenal of he knows math, he knows science, he knows history, he's so well educated. But the ability to get it out, he cannot get it out. And so you have allowed him, through the accommodations you've done at home, you've allowed him to learn, which is the goal. Now we've got to translate that into the machine that the traditional education system is. We did it flawlessly. I couldn't believe it. But I would encourage you to keep a running list of what you're doing to accommodate your student, so that if it does become that you're entering high school and you still see these problems, you still see these challenges in their learning, you can use that to accommodate these testing accommodations and what ended up being, and I don't remember if we did, I think it was a 504. So it'll be very helpful to you to keep this running list. It creates a very powerful case.
Yeah.
For
Great. Wow, Christine, thank you. I had never heard that before, so that's very helpful. We are at 9:53. Kimberly, I know you want to say something on this topic, and then we're going to close out, and then just don't forget everything that you guys asked questions about, including your question, Noelle, is covered in that document we're going to send out next week. So Kimberly, what were you going to share?
Christine, thanks so much, because I'm on the early side of that accommodation, and I really appreciate your word. That was really good for me. But as far as the testing specifically, I think you're referring to the educational psychologist getting that. That is super expensive, and I'm planning on waiting for that. And I appreciate that specific word of waiting till 8th or 9th grade. That was wondering when I should do that. But it's estimated that up to 20% of the population is actually have some form of dyslexia. So it's a very common thing. And I just wanted to say that while every child develops at a different rate, some of my kids were reading at 4, some of my kids weren't reading till 6 and 7. But with my 9-year-old, he's still struggling to read at a first grade level. Reading is extremely hard for him. And I was doing the same phonics program that I've done with all 4 of my other kids. And we were stuck at the same place for 2.5 years. And I couldn't figure out what in the world is going on. And through God's intervention, sending me somebody wonderful at the right time, I did have him tested with a local dyslexia expert, and she actually has her she does testing. She's a mom who lives up in the Brunswick area, and I can post that information as well. But her name is Jill Marr. But she tested him and said, yes, he has severe dyslexia. You're going to have to figure this out, and maybe even have him have some auditory and visual processing testing done as well, which I did. And we had spent the last year going through vision therapy with him. Dr. Davis out in Winchester is wonderful. That has helped him actually begin to progress instead of just staying at the same place. And but it's going to be a marathon for him. We are going to, I'm teaching him takes a lot of work. I have to sit with him for everything. I can't give him any independent work necessarily to do, because he requires me reading everything to him for him to really get it and not be frustrated. So if if you have a second grader that's still struggling to read fluidly, trust your gut. It was in my gut that for a long time that something wasn't quite right. And after teaching 4 kids, I should have known that something was not quite right, but I just wasn't sure if he just was developing differently. I know boys especially develop late sometimes. But I just want to encourage you to trust your gut and reach out to the homeschool community. I know there's several of us here who have students who have struggled with dyslexia and ADD. ADD, actually, 50% of students with dyslexia actually have ADD. So that those two things kind of go hand in hand. It may be visual processing issues too, as well as my son did. He had excessive convergence of his eyes. And so that was actually exacerbating his dyslexia, and it's was just a compounded problem. But anyway, reach out to the homeschool community. There is some ways that you can intervene. And as a homeschool mom, with the right interventions, the right curriculum, I think Julie mentioned the dyslexia focused curriculum. We use the same one she did, which is Barton Reading Program. It's an Orton Gillingham based instructive phonics program, and it's wonderful to help with dyslexia. There's Right Start Math is really helpful with dyslexia as well, as far as a math curriculum. But with the right interventions, you can get your child catching up to his grade level in a matter of time. But and being at home with you, there's no other place, no other school is going to be able to offer them what you're going to be able to offer them one-on-one at home. And you care more about your child's progress and their ability to learn and read more than anybody else on the planet. So I just want to encourage you that you can do it, but reach out to the community, get some input from others, and be encouraged that this isn't a task that's beyond what you're able to do. So anyway, just want to offer that.
Great. Thank you so much. Panelists, really, really appreciate all that you had to share. Very, very grateful for each one of you and your experience. We have 2 minutes to 10. Any last minute thoughts from the panelists? I know you put some good stuff into the chat box, and I'll make sure we get that up to the participants.
I just want to reiterate, I think we've said it a lot here, but read to your kids. I think if you just do an hour of reading every day, it doesn't have to be all 1 hour sitting down at a time, but we usually start our homeschool day with 2 hours of reading. And my kids love it. Matter of fact, my junior in high school, we're doing a summer session for a couple of weeks this summer just to keep things, going. And my daughter just told me yesterday, she says, "Mom, please don't read the Penderwicks without me. I've got to do my chemistry, but I want to come join in on the read aloud time." And they just still love it even into high school. I find my college students, when they're home, they actually come migrate into the room where we're doing read aloud, and they just sit on the arm of the chair next to me. It's just does something in your child's brain that nothing else can do. And it builds that family community and that sense of togetherness that's just beautiful. So to read to your kids, that's what I'd have to say the most important thing is.
Excellent. Anybody else want to share last word? Julie?
Just that, just to remember that whole part about the schedule. It's so hard and it's really tricky to try to figure out what works for you. But just knowing that, I mean, you have all day. First of all, it doesn't have to be from 8 to 3. It's all day. And it can be bedtime. It can be the weekend. And you now are in charge. So like if you want to do school on Columbus Day, you can. Like if you want to do school on those 3 days right before Christmas, well, I don't know if that's a good example, but nobody does. But you can. Or if you want to do school on the days right after New Year's Eve before school starts back up, you can. It's like, and my kids would say, "Why do we have to do it on Columbus Day when everybody else is outside playing?" But then in spring break, when we have 2 weeks off instead of 1, they're like, I get it. That's great. So just if something comes up, I know one of the panelists said this, if something comes up, it's okay. We've even gone into the summer a couple of times with our math because we took too many days off, or when they're sick, it's very tempting to like still have them do work. But if they were in public school and they were sick, they could rest and, get better. So just take a deep breath, and learn as you go. You are not an expert. You're learning also. And so just give yourself that grace to be a student and a learner as well as the mom. So
Yeah.
lots of grace.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, was experiment. You know, at this age group, you're really not going to make a mistake. So experiment. What works, what doesn't work. If it doesn't work, move on, do something else. So the thing that didn't work before could work later. Just keep experimenting and trying different ways that it's going to work for you and your family. Anybody else, Julie or Christine? I know we're pushing the time limit here. 1 minute? You good? Okay, Julie, you got to run. Christine?
I would just enjoy learning. If learning is fun, they'll do it and they'll enjoy it. And there's a lot of joy to this, and a lot of your attitude will permeate your home. And so if you think that it's going to be great, it's going to be great, most likely. So expect things to be good. Look with joy at the days to come. It'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you to all the participants for being here. Thank you to the panelists, and we'll get this out to everyone next week, as well as the chat box and as well as that document. That document's going to be gold. So anyway, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And if you have any questions specifically for one of the panelists, just let me know who the question's for and I'll shoot that over to them. All right. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much.